Hello again. I'm Greg with Occam's Razors. I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this video than I have in others that I've made. In earlier videos, I've discussed points in an effort to correct misunderstandings. In many cases, I've given people the benefit of the doubt and given them an out for positions that they may have. I gave them the option to be ignorant over dumb. I explained how certain commandments may or may not apply to them. However, the topic for today is something that comes close to offending me, so I'm not planning on pulling any punches or offering any outs. The topic for today is a fact that's come up in many of my debates with people. They feel free to inform me that we're living in a Christian nation, so atheists and their opinions are not welcome. Neither are the Muslims, or the fags, or the liberals, or the you get the point. It all rotates around the idea that because the United States is a Christian nation, that it should hold authority over all law and all acts done by the United States. For me, this is like glue. I don't move on the debate until they concede. If they do not, then they are not worth my time, and they are not worth my effort. Just as Mike Dillahunty ends calls when people use Pascal's wager, I refuse to continue a conversation with someone whose root understanding of this country is so weak as to imply that there is a trunk called God which holds up the three branches of government. So, in the interest of informing people of reality, where they may not have come across the information on this topic, I'm going to break down arguments that I've run across from the Christian Nationers and tell you why I'm right and why they're wrong. The U.S. Constitution is the document of American documents. It's the very foundation of our government. And in fact, we have an entire branch of government dedicated to simply judging laws based on that document. The funny thing is for the Christian Nationers is that it does not include any mention of God. If you think that it does, then you should read it sometime. It's a pretty good read, but the Second Amendment could have been a bit more clear. Regardless, there's no mention of God in this document, but it does have something to say about religion. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Article 6 says, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So it seems pretty clear. First, there's the freedom of religion in the First Amendment. It says the government will not choose any religion over any other, and it will not interfere with religious practices. The government has interfered in a few select cases, but only because the rights of a third party have been affected. Article 6 is also clear in that a person's religious affiliation will not discredit them from any office or public trust. Now, when a senator or a congressman runs for office, the public does take into account his or her religion. This is public opinion, and in my opinion, should be the least of one's considerations. Elect the most qualified person regardless of their religion or lack thereof. Otherwise, you're simply asked to being lied to. Don't think so? Well, let's look at some numbers. There are 435 members of Congress, 100 senators, and the president. This makes 536 elected federal positions. Now, this year, Trinity College released a report showing that currently 15% of the people in the United States decline to affiliate with any religion. So, some of those are atheists, but some just want nothing to do with religion at all. By those numbers, then 15% of the 536 elected officials would be either atheists or want nothing to do with religions. 15% of 536, that's about 80 members. Is that the case? No. The number is 1. One single member has acknowledged that he's an atheist. So where are the other 79? The other 79 are on the news, in your state, and you may have voted for them. And if they want to get reelected, they make damn sure that you don't know that they lied to you. That's why I say public opinion should not encompass religion. You're just asking to be lied to. Do you think maybe the people who haggled and fought over the construction of the Constitution had that in mind? So, using the United States Constitution that showed the United States is a Christian nation? No. Next up, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, this pledge was drilled into everyone's heads from the time that they were small kids. What a lot of people don't realize is that this is the version that was drilled into our heads since the 1950s. It is not the original pledge. The original phrase, under God, was added in 1954. So, why was it added? Now, before I tell you, let me move to my next point It'll be more clear why in just a moment. By the way, if you are a history buff, then pay attention to the date because you're going to know my point before anyone else. Next up, we move to In God We Trust. Now, a long time ago, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1864, and thus the 2-cent coin was the very first one that received the words, In God We Trust. This was because at that time, a great sentiment existed that we should unite behind our religion. Now in 1956, In God We Trust was adopted as the United States motto. A year after that, that same motto was used on the very first dollar bill. So it's safe to say that everyone knows that phrase. And if you ever forget, no problem. You can always just whip out a George Washington. Now, the motto, the coins, the dollar bill, and the pledge, which I mentioned earlier, have something in common. Unity. These words were added to our pledge and our cash as ways for people to unite. But why? We're already united behind our people, our flag, our principles. Why was more unity needed? This is when you can find the history buffs in the room. They're the ones nodding their heads because they know the answer is war. Now, during war, certain people and certain governments do things that would not be accepted by today's standards. Individuals do things just to survive. Local and federal governments do things that would not be really accepted by today's standards. If you don't think so, think about Japanese internment camps. Think about fire bombings. Federal governments also do things like try to change rules during wars. The Coinage Act of 1864 was done during the Civil War. The motto, the pledge, and paper money changed during the Cold War when two nations faced off against each other and the rest of the world just held their breath. In God We Trust is unconstitutional, said the Ninth Circuit Court, and I agree. To understand why, simply ask yourself, what about the outcry that would arise today if that was changed to In Allah We Trust, or In Zeus We Trust, or Caligula, who was a god in his very own mind? I think it's unconstitutional, and I definitely think it is dangerous to mix religion with politics, and history buffs would definitely agree. Now next, we're going to move to the Treaty of Tripoli. Now this was a very important document because it was the very first treaty ever signed by the new nation of the United States. The Treaty of Tripoli had something very important to say about religion. It says, the government is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Now with the Treaty of Tripoli, if it had passed by a hair's breadth of a vote, and let's say there was great outcry from the public because of it, then I'll concede that it would not be as strong as an argument as it is today. And so what a lot of Christians try to do, they try to just throw it out, but that's not really the case. The Treaty of Tripoli was approved by a unanimous vote. The Treaty of Tripoli was also printed in many newspapers, often on the very front page. There was no outcry, there was no civil disobedience, there was no protests or effigies burned. The people accepted it at this time. Maybe they had a little bit better grasp on the separation of religion and the country and the government than we do today. Now, the Treaty of Tripoli was signed by many of our founding fathers, and this also comes up a lot in debates with Christian nationers, because they'll point to the founding fathers and point out that they were all Christians, so that's what they intended, was for the United States to be a Christian nation. What this starts is just a circular round robin all the time that I see. Secular groups will put up quotes from the founding fathers showing that they were atheists. Christian groups then put up quotes showing that they were theists and not atheists. And that just seems to go round and round and round. Personally, I think the bigger picture gets overlooked whenever you go into that argument. You're missing the bigger picture of what the founding fathers actually intended. So, let's look at this example. Now, in 1927, a man named Willard opened up a small curbside stand. He sold root beer. He named it after his wife and himself. His wife's name was Alice, and his name was Willard, and that became A&W Root Beer. It's the same root beer that you can buy today. The root beer was really good, and the curbside stand did really well. They expanded to a small cafe called the Hot Shop. Later, that expanded, and he started doing food distribution during World War II in defense plants. That also did really, really well, and after the Second World War, they ended up opening up food distribution for schools and hospitals. Much later, because they made a lot of money and just were really, really good at business, they ended up expanding that to hotels. Today, the hotel chain bears only his last name of Marriott.